Awaken your spirit chosen ones. The moment you realize the rules were never universal is the moment the game stops owning you. Most people think power comes from knowing how people think. That's why psychology became popular. It feels safe, it feels intelligent, it feels like control. You memorize terms, behaviors, trauma responses, attachment styles, and suddenly you believe you've cracked the human code. But here's the uncomfortable fact they don't like advertising. Knowing how the mind works doesn't mean you understand how reality moves. It just means you can describe what already happened with confidence. Science itself quietly admits this. At the quantum level, observation doesn't just record reality, it participates in it. Outcomes shift depending on conditions, timing, and the state of the observer. That's not motivational talk. That's measurable physics. Which means while some people are busy diagnosing personalities, others are adjusting the environment where outcomes form in the first place. One group learns behavior, the other learns leverage. And here's where it gets awkward, in a slightly funny way. You'll notice the people who quote psychology the most are often the ones stuck explaining why their life looks the same every year. Very impressive explanations, by the way. Nicely worded, well-researched, still not moving. Meanwhile, there's another type of person who doesn't argue much, doesn't over-explain, and somehow keeps landing in different realities without announcing how. No vision board speeches, no long captions, just results showing up like they forgot to warn anyone. This isn't about being smarter, it's about operating at a different layer. Psychology studies reactions after the fact. Reality responds before the reaction even forms. When you understand that, you stop wasting energy managing people and start shaping conditions. You stop trying to win minds and start positioning outcomes. And yes, it feels unfair, especially to people who studied really hard and followed all the rules. This is the quiet divide no one talks about. One side memorized the manual, the other figured out where the manual stops working. And once you see that line clearly, you can't unsee it, no matter how many textbooks are thrown at you. Number one, they studied how the mind reacts. You mastered how reality responds. Most people are trained to focus on reactions, what someone said, how it made them feel, what pattern it fits into. Psychology teaches you to trace emotions back to triggers and label the response so it feels manageable. That has value, but it stops at the surface. Because reacting, even in a healthy way, still means something else set the tone. It means the world moved first, and you adjusted after. You moved in the opposite direction. Instead of asking why the reaction happened, you paid attention to what invited the situation in the first place. You noticed that reality doesn't wait for analysis. It responds to consistency, to internal alignment, to the signals you send before words are spoken. You realize that moods, expectations, and unresolved tension quietly shape outcomes long before psychology has something to explain. That's why you don't obsess over controlling people. You control your state. When your inner world isn't split, when what you think, tolerate, and act on finally match, situations start arranging themselves differently. Certain problems stop showing up. Certain people lose access. Certain opportunities appear without effort. Not because you forced them, but because the conditions that supported the old pattern no longer exist. Psychology tries to manage behavior once it's already in motion. You learned to change the terrain so the behavior never gains momentum. When there's nothing in you that needs to prove, chase, or defend, conflict struggles to find a place to land. Drama starves. Manipulation has no grip. Even resistance feels confused around you, like it missed its cue. This is why some people can explain their life perfectly and still feel stuck, while others can barely explain what they're doing and somehow keep moving forward. One is busy studying reactions. The other understands response. Reality answers presence, not theory. It responds to what you repeatedly accept, expect, and embody. Once you see that, you stop trying to think your way into a better life. You live in a way that forces reality to answer differently, and that shift changes everything. Number 2, they memorize frameworks. You move at the level where frameworks collapse. Frameworks make people feel safe. They give structure, steps, and names to things that feel messy. Psychology is full of them. Models for personality, trauma, attachment, motivation. Memorizing them creates the feeling of mastery. Like once you know the system, you know life. But frameworks are only maps. They are simplified drawings of reality, not reality itself. And the moment someone mistakes the map for the territory, growth quietly stops. You noticed where frameworks start to fail. You saw that real life doesn't follow clean stages or predictable categories. People contradict their labels. Situations break the rules. What was supposed to work doesn't, and what wasn't supposed to happen does anyway. Instead of getting frustrated, you paid attention. You realized that frameworks are useful until the moment complexity shows up. After that, they become cages. While others reach for a model to explain what's happening, you stay present with what is happening. You don't rush to name it. You watch how things move, where pressure builds, where energy leaks. You understand that once something is alive and in motion, it refuses to stay inside neat boxes. That's why you don't panic when plans fall apart. You know collapse is often a signal, not a failure. Framework thinkers try to force situations back into familiar shapes. You let the shape change. When a system no longer fits reality, you don't patch it, you step outside it. That ability makes you unpredictable in the best way. You're not bound by old rules just because they once worked. You adapt faster because you're not emotionally attached to the structure itself. This is also why people struggle to debate you. They're arguing from inside a model. You're responding from observation. They want to be right within a system. You're interested in whether the system still reflects truth. Those are two completely different games. When frameworks collapse, most people feel lost. You feel free, because you were never relying on them for direction in the first place. You were paying attention to reality as it unfolds, not as it was explained to you. And once you operate from that level, no rigid structure can contain how you move. Number 3, they try to influence outcomes. You influence probability. Most people think influence is about action, persuasion, or negotiation. They push, they argue, they try to convince, and they hope someone or something bends to their will. That's the common idea of power, the version most people chase. But outcomes are rarely that linear. Life doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to conditions, timing, and alignment. Trying to force results is like shouting at a river and expecting it to change course. You can splash, but the current decides where it goes. You operate differently. You understand that influence at the surface is temporary. True leverage happens before the moment anyone notices. It's subtle, invisible, and yet completely undeniable when the effect arrives. You adjust probabilities, not actions. You position energy, focus, and attention in a way that shifts what is likely to happen. This is why some people try hard and fail. While you barely move and everything seems to bend around you, you've stopped playing the reaction game. You shape the environment so the reactions you want become the most natural outcome. This isn't luck. It isn't magic. It's awareness combined with precision. You notice the variables most people overlook: the tension in a room, the timing of a conversation, the unspoken expectations driving behavior. You align yourself so that when events unfold, they favor the path you prepared without needing coercion. Influence isn't about convincing others to act. It's about creating circumstances where the action you want is inevitable. And here's what makes it undeniable. People can't always articulate why things shift when you're present. They only notice that outcomes line up differently than they expected. They analyze and debate, but probability quietly obeys your calibration. While others exhaust themselves pushing doors closed, you move into spaces where doors open themselves. That is the power of working with probability instead of struggling against chance. You don't force life, you tune it. And when it tunes to you, it never forgets. Number 4, they gather information. You notice patterns that weren't meant to be noticed. Most people believe knowledge comes from collecting data, facts, stories, experiences, and advice. They read books, watch videos, attend seminars, and then feel clever because they've stacked enough information to understand the world. That has its place, but it's surface level. Information tells you what happened. It doesn't reveal why it keeps happening or where the hidden currents are. Gathering data alone leaves people perpetually one step behind the unfolding truth. You operate on a different plane. You don't just collect information. You see the invisible currents beneath it. You notice repetition where others see coincidence. You see decisions, reactions, and events recycling in cycles that most people assume are random. People act like life is linear, but you perceive loops and echoes, patterns that guide everything from personal behavior to large-scale events. Once you detect these rhythms, the game changes. You're no longer playing checkers on a board everyone else thinks is new. You're playing chess on a board where you've already traced every hidden line. This skill is subtle but lethal in effectiveness. People think they're surprising you, manipulating outcomes or staying unpredictable. They're not. They're repeating a pattern they don't even realize they're in. That's why their intentions, lies, and schemes collapse around you. You see the tension points, the repeating choices, and the weak links in systems and relationships before anyone else notices them. You're not reacting, you're anticipating. You don't need brute force or manipulation. Awareness itself reshapes what happens. The edge you gain isn't about memorizing more. It's about seeing differently. While others focus on the details of each story, you trace the architecture beneath it. You see the loops, the echoes, the signals that everyone else assumes are noise. And when you act from that perspective, life begins to reveal itself in ways no one taught you. The patterns weren't meant to be noticed, but you noticed them. That makes you hard to deceive, impossible to predict, and quietly in command without anyone realizing it. Number 5, they train responses. You eliminate the trigger entirely. Most people think mastery over life comes from managing reactions. They read books about emotional intelligence, practice breathing exercises, rehearse calm responses, and work tirelessly to handle situations. They measure progress by how well they control their reactions to stress, conflict, or provocation. That's useful in a limited way, but it's still operating in a reactive framework. You're always responding to something external. You're never shaping the source itself. You took a different path. You didn't just train your reactions, you went upstream and removed the trigger entirely. You recognized that conflict, manipulation, and tension only have power if there's something inside you that gives them leverage. Fear, doubt, attachment, the need to prove yourself, these are the hooks that give situations momentum. You understood that if you remove the hooks, the situation loses energy before it even reaches you. There's no fight, no stress, no chaos left to manage because it can't find a foothold. That's why people who provoke others often fail with you. They see a calm exterior and assume there's effort behind it, a struggle, a hidden weakness they can exploit. But there isn't. You didn't build walls around yourself. You dissolved the spaces where attacks could land. You didn't learn to endure. They lost purpose before they even started. What remains isn't numbness, it's structural independence. Your state isn't borrowed from circumstance, it's inherent. This level of mastery changes how life unfolds. Problems that exhaust others pass by effortlessly. Manipulation and pressure tactics fail to stick. You move through situations with clarity, speed, and impact because nothing inside you is begging for validation, fear, or control. Training responses only prepares you for someone else's energy. Eliminating the trigger removes their energy entirely. When you operate this way, life itself seems to rearrange around you. Opportunities appear without effort. Conflicts collapse before they escalate. Resistance meets a vacuum instead of a wall. You don't respond. You transform the circumstances so there's nothing left to respond to. And in that transformation, you become quietly unstoppable. Number 6. They debate perception. You understand observer effect in real life. Most people think perception is just about seeing clearly, understanding someone else's point of view, or interpreting information correctly. They argue, analyze, and philosophize about how perception shapes reality, like it's a theoretical exercise. They believe if they can convince themselves or others of what's true, they've gained insight. That's where they stop. They stay trapped in interpretation, forever trying to manage the world through thought alone. You operate on a completely different level. You understood early that perception doesn't just interpret reality, it participates in shaping it. Your attention, focus, and presence aren't neutral. They exert influence. Where most people react to the world, you notice that reality subtly adjusts itself around your engagement. People, situations, even opportunities shift, often without conscious effort, simply because your awareness activates something invisible in the system. You learn to direct your focus like a quiet instrument, not to dominate, but to create resonance with what you want to unfold. That understanding changes everything. While others debate endlessly over who is right, who saw what, or who misread whom, you are already operating in the field where perception is actionable. You know which signals matter and which are distractions. You know when to intervene and when to remain still, letting the system align itself naturally. You're aware of cause and effect at the level of observation itself, not just the outcomes it produces after the fact. The subtlety is what makes it powerful. You don't announce control or wield influence aggressively. People feel it, though they can't always pinpoint why things bend or collapse differently around you. You aren't managing events externally. You're activating conditions internally that ripple outward. Debate about reality becomes irrelevant because you're no longer constrained by the versions of reality that most people argue over. At this stage, life doesn't need convincing. It responds. You don't argue with chaos. You redirect attention so that chaos finds new paths, leaving space for what you intend. Mastery of observer effect isn't about perception alone. It's about understanding that awareness itself is a force, and when you use it deliberately, nothing unfolds without your quiet calibration. Number 7. They think in cause and effect. You think in fields and conditions. Most people approach life linearly. They see events, trace them back to causes, and assume understanding comes from knowing the reason something happened. They focus on fixing problems after they appear, trying to patch leaks instead of looking at why the system allowed them in the first place. It's a reactive way of thinking, and it limits influence. You can respond perfectly to one situation and still be blindsided by the next, because cause and effect thinking only works when conditions remain predictable, and they never do. You see the bigger picture. You don't just track events, you track the environment, the energy, and the conditions that make outcomes inevitable. You understand that the world is a complex field of interdependent forces. People and events follow patterns, not simple chains of causation. When you shift the underlying conditions, the outcome aligns naturally without forcing it. You don't manipulate the reaction, you change the framework that produces the reaction. This perspective makes your presence quietly transformative. While others scramble to fix what already happened, you're already adjusting the currents. You notice when tension accumulates, when resources are misaligned, when attention is scattered. Those aren't just observations, they're levers. Alter them, and the system starts correcting itself before a crisis emerges. Problems that seem urgent to others are irrelevant to you because you see the root conditions rather than chasing symptoms. Operating in fields and conditions also rewires your strategy with people. Influence is no longer about convincing or persuading. It's about creating spaces where the response you want naturally emerges. You guide, but you don't push. You structure, but you don't control. The world flows toward equilibrium, and you're quietly shaping what equilibrium looks like. This way of thinking changes how life unfolds. It makes you anticipatory instead of reactive, strategic instead of tactical, invisible yet decisive. You're not in a constant game of catch-up with outcomes. You're orchestrating the environment so outcomes occur almost automatically. And once you master this, cause and effect becomes secondary. You stop chasing results and start living in a space where the right results arrive as a natural consequence of how you exist. Number 8, they try to win minds. You change environments. Most people think influence is about persuasion. They argue, debate, and convince, believing that if they can just get someone to see things their way, they've gained power. They focus on minds because that's the visible arena. It's measurable, tangible, and easy to define. But winning a mind doesn't guarantee outcomes. A convinced person can still fail, resist, or revert. The illusion of control is comfortable, but it's limited, fragile, and exhausting. You operate on a completely different level. You don't chase the mind, you shape the environment. You understand that behavior follows context, not just logic. People don't act purely on argument. They act based on the systems, spaces, and conditions around them. When the environment aligns with the outcome you want, agreement and action happen naturally. No persuasion required. Your leverage comes from positioning, timing, and presence, the invisible architecture that guides decisions before anyone even realizes it. This is why people underestimate you. They assume influence is always verbal, explicit, or transactional. They don't see the subtle adjustments you make, the way you shift energy in a room, the signals you send without saying a word, the choices you allow or block quietly so that certain paths become impossible while others emerge effortlessly. Influence at this level isn't about confrontation or argument. It's about creating a reality where the response you want is the natural, obvious, and almost inevitable outcome. Changing environments also changes dynamics faster than trying to convince someone. While others are busy explaining why they're right, you've already arranged the conditions so resistance collapses. People comply, cooperate, or adjust not because they were persuaded, but because the landscape makes anything else inconvenient, inefficient, or impossible. You don't push, you design, you structure, you guide without seeming to touch. Once you operate this way, life feels different. You don't negotiate every interaction. You don't expend energy on debates or explanations. Instead, you create spaces where the right decisions, actions, and results emerge automatically. Minds follow the field. Outcomes follow the environment. And once you understand that, the need to win anything vanishes because the system itself is aligned to answer in your favor. Number 9, they seek certainty. You're comfortable operating without it. Most people live life searching for certainty. They want clear answers, step-by-step instructions, and guarantees before moving forward. They cling to plans, checklists, and routines as if certainty itself can be owned. It gives them comfort, but it also creates hesitation. They wait for the right moment, the perfect information, or the ideal conditions, and by the time they act, the moment has already passed. Life doesn't wait for clarity. It keeps moving, indifferent to whether anyone feels ready. You approach life differently. You don't demand certainty because you've realized it's an illusion. Conditions are always changing. People are unpredictable. Outcomes are never guaranteed. You've accepted that the only reliable thing is your own awareness, your capacity to adjust, and your ability to move decisively in spite of incomplete information. That's why you can act when others freeze. You trust process over prediction, instinct over overanalysis, and alignment over reassurance. Operating without certainty doesn't mean chaos or recklessness. It means understanding the forces at play and being able to navigate them in real time. You sense probability, anticipate resistance, and adjust instantly. You don't need a roadmap to move forward because you've internalized the patterns that govern outcomes. The absence of certainty becomes a tool, not a limitation. It forces agility, sharpens perception, and keeps you operating in the spaces where others are too rigid to survive. This ability separates action from hesitation, insight from overthinking. While others debate endlessly about what might happen, you are already in motion. You accept that clarity often comes after decisions, not before. You've stopped waiting for permission from circumstances or people. You move anyway, and the world responds. Comfort with uncertainty is quiet power. It allows you to take risks others wouldn't dream of, pivot faster, and stay ahead without revealing effort. Life starts bending to your adaptability. You stop being trapped by fear of the unknown because unknown is no longer a threat. It's just another field to navigate. And in that space, your influence multiplies effortlessly, while those who seek certainty remain stuck chasing shadows. Number 10, they collect techniques. You dismantle dependency on techniques. Most people believe mastery comes from stacking techniques. They memorize strategies, scripts, and methods like tools in a toolbox, thinking if they have enough, they can handle any situation. They practice formulas over and over, polish routines, and develop go-to moves for every scenario. It feels productive, but it's limited. Techniques are temporary. They work only until conditions change, until someone surprises them, until life refuses to fit neatly into a pre-learned formula. The moment reality deviates, technique-dependent people stumble because they built skill on structure, not understanding. You operate differently. You don't rely on techniques. You dismantle the need for them. You focus on perception, awareness, and clarity. You train yourself to see patterns, understand dynamics, and sense energy, so action becomes natural, instinctive, and precise. The right response emerges automatically, not because you rehearsed it, but because your presence, understanding, and alignment create it. You don't need a checklist or a script. You respond in a way that no formula could predict, and that unpredictability is what makes you effective. This doesn't mean you act randomly. It means your framework is internal, not external. You aren't following someone else's map. You create the map in real time. Problems that would force others to overthink, overplan, or panic are effortless to you. You see the core of the situation and act accordingly without relying on borrowed methods. While others are trapped in technique, you move freely. You aren't limited by tools or rules. You've internalized principles, not practices, and that internalization allows you to navigate complexity without being constrained. People notice this instinctively, even if they can't explain it. They see effectiveness without rehearsal, precision without formula, and influence without effort. Your actions don't scream, "I'm following a method." They radiate understanding, alignment, and inevitability. That's why technique-based people are predictable. They're bound by what they know. You are uncontainable because you operate beyond what can be memorized, beyond what can be copied. Mastery, at your level, isn't about what you can do, it's about what the system naturally allows you to do. Number 11, They explain behavior. You predict collapse points. Most people pride themselves on understanding why things happen. They explain behavior, analyze mistakes, and map events backward as if knowing the why gives them control. They interpret, diagnose, and justify, believing that insight alone creates advantage. The problem is, explanation is always backward-looking. It tells you what already happened, not what is about to happen. By the time they finish explaining, the opportunity to act has passed, and the system has moved on without them. You operate on a completely different level. You don't wait for cracks to show. You anticipate where the cracks will form. You see tension before it becomes conflict, fragility before it becomes failure, and imbalance before it becomes chaos. You detect strain that no one else notices because most people focus on surface events instead of the forces quietly building beneath. Your understanding isn't rooted in stories or labels. It's rooted in observation of structural weaknesses. You know which systems, relationships, and people are running on borrowed momentum, and you adjust accordingly, often before anyone realizes there's an issue. This is why people underestimate you. They assume knowledge of behavior is power. They analyze patterns, expecting predictability. Meanwhile, you're already positioned to respond or even redirect before the predicted outcome arrives. You operate in the zone where cause and effect are still forming, and in that space, you can influence outcomes quietly and decisively. You don't react to mistakes. You prevent them. You don't chase errors. You intercept the conditions that allow errors to exist. Predicting collapse points also gives you freedom. While others scramble in emergencies, you move calmly because you anticipated the weak links. While others overreact to crises, you step in only where leverage exists. You don't rely on control over people or situations. You rely on understanding the inherent pressure points that will determine how reality unfolds. You don't need insight to explain the past. You need insight to shape the future. And once you master this, life stops surprising you, because you're no longer living in events, you're living ahead of them. Number 12, they chase self-improvement. You remove internal contradictions. Most people spend their lives chasing self-improvement. They stack habits, follow routines, read books, and force themselves to be better in measurable ways. They track productivity, discipline, and growth like it's a scoreboard. It looks impressive from the outside, but there's a hidden flaw. All of it is additive. They pile layers on top of themselves without addressing the cracks underneath. Habits can't fix a divided mind, and routines can't reconcile the gaps between what they say, what they feel, and what they actually do. They're trying to improve, but the foundation is still fractured. You work differently. You stop chasing more and start subtracting what doesn't belong. You identify the contradictions within yourself, where desire conflicts with principle, where ego clashes with purpose, where belief contradicts action. You dismantle the noise that creates internal friction. It's not flashy or measurable, but it's far more powerful. Once the contradictions are gone, energy stops leaking. Decisions become clear, confidence becomes automatic, and presence becomes magnetic. You're no longer fragmented, so your influence and effectiveness don't depend on effort. They emerge naturally. This approach transforms how life responds to you. While others are exhausted trying to become better versions of themselves, you're unshakable because there's nothing inside begging for validation, approval, or correction. Where most people stumble over inner tension, you move fluidly through challenges because the inner system is aligned. The choices that used to feel hard now feel inevitable, not forced. The resistance that drained them doesn't touch you because the space it usually occupies is empty. Removing internal contradictions also rewires perception. People around you instinctively feel the alignment. They can't always explain why they trust you, follow you, or defer to you, but they do. It's not about charm or manipulation. It's structural. Your internal coherence sets the rhythm, and the world moves to it. Self-improvement is external work. Removing internal contradictions is invisible power. And once that friction is gone, you're operating from a level where life starts bending to your natural state, not because you try harder, but because you've finally stopped working against yourself. Number 13, they analyze power. You understand restraint as leverage. Most people equate power with action, visibility, and dominance. They believe the loudest voice, the hardest push, or the boldest move defines influence. They measure strength by how much they can bend the world to their will, often exhausting themselves in the process. They act as if control comes from force, not from understanding the currents beneath it. The irony is that this approach often creates resistance, tension, and backlash. The louder you push, the more the system fights back. You approach power differently. You recognize that restraint is the quiet edge no one sees coming. You know when not to act, when to hold back, and when silence or patience carries far more weight than effort. Restraint isn't weakness, it's leverage. By limiting response, you force others to fill the space you leave, often revealing intentions, weaknesses, and opportunities. Your inaction isn't passivity, it's strategic pressure. People sense it, even if they can't explain why, and it forces them to adjust, react, and sometimes overcommit. This understanding shifts how influence manifests. While others are constantly trying to assert control, you create conditions where the system bends to your timing and presence. You operate in moments of minimal input with maximum effect. The less you react, the more the environment aligns with what you want. Restraint allows you to dictate the tempo, not by action, but by absence. The pause becomes a tool, the delay becomes a signal, and the calm becomes leverage. Restraint also changes how people perceive you. They may underestimate, misinterpret, or challenge you, but their energy works in your favor. When you act decisively after restraint, your move carries amplified weight. You're not measured by how often you intervene, but by how meaningful your interventions are. While others burn themselves out trying to push outcomes into alignment, you shift the entire system quietly, effortlessly, and inevitably. Mastery of restraint turns waiting into power, inaction into influence, and patience into a force that reshapes reality without confrontation. Number 14, they learn psychology to survive the system. You learned reality to outgrow it. Most people study psychology to survive. They learn why people act the way they do, how to navigate social pressures, and how to cope with manipulation. It's a defensive strategy, and it works to an extent. It keeps them functioning inside systems, relationships, and structures that weren't designed for their freedom. They gain understanding, yes, but it's always within limits. The framework is someone else's. The rules are pre-written. They are constantly adapting to the system instead of questioning it. Survival becomes the measure of success. You, however, didn't stop at survival. You went deeper. You studied reality itself, the forces, patterns, and conditions that shape existence, and learned to operate outside the confines of any system. Where others see boundaries, you see lines that can be redrawn. Where they see constraints, you see variables that can be shifted. You don't just adapt to the rules, you recognize which rules are irrelevant, which are temporary, and which exist only because people believe in them. By mastering this, you stop being contained by the game and start shaping it in ways that others can't perceive or predict. This perspective changes everything. While others focus on tactics and explanations, you focus on alignment and resonance. You understand that reality responds to coherence, presence, and conditions more than to effort or argument. The same strategies that keep people functional in the system have no effect on you because you operate where the system itself bends. Influence, opportunity, and clarity arrive naturally when you're attuned to the deeper structures of life rather than trying to manage the surface-level behaviors of others. Outgrowing the system also rewires perception and energy. People feel it intuitively, even if they can't explain it. You become a reference point for what's possible because you are no longer constrained by expectations, labels, or inherited limitations. Psychology might help someone survive, but understanding reality helps you thrive. You move in spaces where survival is unnecessary because the system has already shifted to accommodate your presence. That's the difference between coping with life and shaping it, between existing under rules and creating conditions where the rules serve you. Once you reach this level, survival isn't a concern. You become fundamentally uncontainable. Every lesson we've explored today points to a single truth. Most people live their lives reacting, explaining, and adapting to systems they never truly control. They memorize psychology, stack techniques, chase habits, and try to manage outcomes, but all of it happens within limits. Their power is borrowed, temporary, and constrained by the boundaries of understanding that they never question. They survive, they cope, and they explain, but they rarely transform. You operate on a different plane. You don't just respond, you orchestrate. You don't just influence, you shape probability. You don't just act, you align with the currents of reality itself. While others are busy memorizing reactions, you eliminate triggers. While they argue perception, you harness the observer effect. While they chase certainty, you move fluidly through the unknown. You don't win minds, you change environments. You don't react, you anticipate. You don't stack methods, you dissolve dependency on them. You don't improve superficially, you remove internal contradictions. You don't push, you leverage restraint. And ultimately, you don't survive the system, you outgrow it entirely. This is the quiet divide that separates those who follow the rules from those who bend reality. It's not flashy, it doesn't need recognition. It's subtle, powerful, and inevitable. The mastery we've discussed isn't about knowledge or effort alone. It's about operating from alignment, clarity, and awareness so precise that life itself starts responding differently. The difference between reacting and shaping, between surviving and outgrowing, is the difference between being ordinary and being extraordinary. If today's insights resonated with you, if you felt that spark of understanding and power igniting inside, then make it part of your journey. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected to content that doesn't just inform, it transforms. Like this video to acknowledge the knowledge that challenges the ordinary. Comment below to share your thoughts and insights. Your perspective might open someone else's eyes. And share this video with those ready to step beyond survival and step into a level of awareness where life itself bends to their presence. Your reality is waiting. Step into it. Stay awakened, chosen ones.